because as we've seen, the guy who is running the country is not running the country. So on this Iowa caucus note, I watched these videos. I watched Tim Pool's podcast, but it was a campaign rally for Vivek. And he said a couple things in this that I really liked and enjoyed. And so I wanted to kind of just touch on a couple of them. The first one, well, let's just watch this. So this is the first clip of Vivek I have speaking on Tim Pool's podcast.
Overarching focus on what are called Judeo-Christian values time and time again, and have me as a traditionalist wondering when the other shoe will drop for me and my loved ones.
So I cut this lady's question up, but this is a really good question and a really good answer. This woman is an atheist, and she asks Vivek about, do atheists have a seat at the table? She basically, because his entire campaign is based on truth, and he says that there's one true God and all that stuff. So anyway, listen to this lady's question, which is a great question, and Vivek's response, which Russell Dobler said he thinks Vivek has a lot of political talent. He is 100% correct about that. And they also talked about him being a little bit smarmy and having a little bit of that political vibe. He does have a very Obama kind of sheen to him. He's a very good speaker, and he seems very genuine. I don't want to take anything away from him, but he's also an outsider. So I think he's appealing to a lot of these people. And this is obviously stuff that you're not going to see in the mainstream news in relation to the Iowa caucus. So check this out.
Who are not religious, yet share the same values from a secular viewpoint. I know that your first truth is that God is real, and although I respectfully disagree with that solitary point, I would earnestly like to know if you think it's possible for families with a focus in secular humanism to have a similarly positive experience in religious education, or a place in your movement where one of the tenets of unifying principles stands in direct odds with our religious freedoms.
So it's a great question. I first of all think that the job of the U.S. president is to swear an oath to the Constitution and to keep it. That includes the First Amendment, which includes religious liberty, the freedom of religious exercise, which includes the right not to practice a particular faith either. And so that's squarely the job of the U.S. president. And I think that, there was a lot of thoughtfulness in that question because, yes, I was the lone Hindu student in a Catholic high school in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I did take a lot away.
So he understands a little bit what it's like to be a religious outcast, like a secular atheist would.
From that religious education, despite not converting to Catholicism at the end of it. And so my core belief system is that there's one true God. God puts us here for a purpose. It's our moral duty to realize that purpose, that we're all equal. God works through us in different ways, but we're all equal because God still resides in each.
I need to get a clip, by the way, of Beavis and Butthead saying, "You said duty."
That's the heart of my faith, my Hindu faith. I think there's deep compatibility with the values. It's a different faith and a different theology. But the value system, including the Judeo-Christian values that this country was founded on. Now, what do the Ten Commandments say? I read them for the first time in 9th grade. There's one true God. Don't take his name in vain. Observe the Sabbath. Honor your parents. Don't kill, don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, don't commit adultery, don't covet, broadly.
See, the Ten Commandments gets a little dicey for me too, because honor your parents. Okay, what if your parents are abusing you or sexually abusing you? Then you still honor your parents? No, it's not that simple. It's a little too simple.
In simpler terms, that's what broadly they say. If I, as a Hindu, can certainly find common purpose with those shared values, and I do, and I think those are Judeo-Christian values. I think this nation was, as a historical fact, founded on Judeo-Christian values. Then I believe somebody who has a Kantian.
That is actually not a fact. I've just been reading about the Quakers, and I don't know how much you know about the Quakers, but they are very interesting, and I'm going to go a lot deeper into that on another show. But I'm reading about the Quakers in Voltaire, and I didn't realize that William Penn, the guy who founded Pennsylvania, was actually kind of seen as a enemy of the Anglican Church in England. And anyway, that's a total aside. Let's keep listening.
Worldview, or pick your favorite secular ordering, can also find common cause with those values. I believe it's easier to arrive at those values just mentally if you anchor yourself grounded in God. I think it's actually a lot harder to get there through secular worldviews. If you want to follow, Emmanuel,
Wondering
I
when the other
disagree,
shoe will
but
drop for me and my
sorry.
loved ones who
I always
name
do
in
that.
vain, observe the Sabbath, honor. If I, as a Hindu, can certainly find common purpose with those shared values, and I do, and I think those are Judeo-Christian values, can also find common cause with those values. I believe it's easier to arrive at those values just mentally if you anchor yourself grounded in God. I think it's actually a lot harder to get there through secular worldviews. If you want to follow, Immanuel Kant or whoever else, I think it's a harder path. But to answer your question, can somebody who is
That's it. Immanuel Kant is a very intellectual reference. Cheers to you for that, Vivek.
secular, non-religious, agnostic, or atheist still find common cause with the shared values that this country was founded on? Absolutely. And even more, even if you disagree with some of those values, do you have the right to live in this country? And are you still protected by the same constitutional rights? The answer to that is also absolutely yes in the United States of America. And that's what it means not to run for pastor. And I would be
Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. I was forced to memorize this shit in school, and I'm surprised that a lot more people don't know these things.
certainly an odd choice to run for pastor of a Christian church. But that's not the job of the U.S. president. The job of the U.S. president is to swear an oath to the Constitution and to keep it. I mean, as far as I know, one of our conversations, Steve is a Christian. Eddie's you're a pastor? You're a minister. And I think that we're
This guy,
not
you're right,
here
that he's pointing to
out
too, is
of-
a black man who's an Iowa representative. So this idea from that article about the caucuses that Iowa's a completely white state is not true.
our role to join the ministry together, but out of our shared commitment to the Constitution. And so the answer to your question is yes. And I am sharing with you always what my true convictions are. We are one nation under God. It's part of our creed. I think part of what's happened in this country is we've turned God into a four-letter word, which I don't think should actually is good for our culture. I don't think it's good for kids. I don't think it's good for national unity. But that doesn't mean that if you're
One of the things these people always neglect to mention is like the Crusades or the Inquisition or all of the terrible things that religion has done as well. Now, I'm not discounting that religion does a lot of good in the world. It does. But there's a darker side to it. Catholic priests molesting kids, like en masse.
atheist, somehow you're not welcome in this country. I think that as long as you share the shared commitments to the Constitution, you're still an American, and that's what matters. So thank you. I appreciate that.
I love that. I mean, that is something you will not see. That's a Republican saying that, there's no debate happening on the Democratic side, obviously, but to me, it's encouraging to see that level of intellectualism and debate happening on the Republican side. You know what I mean? Know what I'm saying? Know what I'm saying? So this one's really interesting because what happens is this guy comes up and he basically says, I want to vote for Trump, but I like you a lot. What can you kind of say? I'll just let you see the question. But he basically asks him why he should vote for Vivek over Trump. And Vivek's answer is actually really good. I was really impressed with this.
Hey, Ryan.
There you go. So I followed your campaign since basically the beginning, and I love your message. I think you could fix this country. We've seen what they've done going after Donald Trump. Indictments, even trying to remove him from the ballot in certain states. My question is, how do I vote for Vivek Ramaswamy without sending the message that I am okay with what they are doing to Donald Trump?
Very good question.
I think your question weighs on the minds of a lot of people I met today. What I saw in many of the rooms I was in was a sense of struggle with that question of loyalty. And I think our loyalty, my loyalty, and I know Donald Trump's loyalty and the loyalty of the people participating in this caucus process is to this country. So the question is what's right for the country. Let's just agree with that whoever you're going to vote for, that's what matters here. Not loyalty to me, not loyalty to Trump. It's loyalty to the United States of America. I think if you want to, I'm going to be blunt about this. I think if you want to save Trump and save this country, a vote for me is actually the way to go. What they're doing to Donald Trump is wrong. I have stood up against it at every step of this process, to the point of derision, to the point of people have had all kinds of conspiracy theories about me, but one of them, and more popular ones, is there's some kind of Trump plant, that Trump and I had some kind of deal early on in this campaign to somehow eliminate Ron DeSantis, as though this was a worthy goal for a guy who's got other things to do in life than to focus on eliminating Ron DeSantis from contention. No, that was ridiculous. But I'm saying that I've been so strongly supportive.
I had never heard
of
that,
Donald
by the
Trump
way.
in the face of these prosecutions that even many people circulated nonsense like this. I've stood up against, I went to the Miami courthouse, I've stood up against these persecutions. For God's sake, I have actually written a FOIA demand and submitted it, Freedom of Information Act request, to know what Biden told Jack Smith, what Merrick Garland told Jack Smith, followed through on that, taken legal steps, and I hope we get accountability. I think that I wasn't planning on announcing this tonight, but might as well just say it. I think tomorrow morning, if not by noon, by tomorrow morning in the next 48 hours, I am submitting an amicus brief to the Supreme Court, arguing for why they need to overturn Colorado's disastrous decision to try to keep Donald Trump off the ballot, because it's the right thing to do for this country.
See, that's so smart, because even if he loses, he's positioning himself for a position in Trump's cabinet. There's all kinds of different ways he can go by just kind of like pandering to the MAGA base. He's smart enough to know that the Nikki Haley's and the Ron DeSantis's, the people that the media is clearly putting over. I mean, when I did a search today for the Iowa caucus on Google, I saw a couple articles from the mainstream media about like Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley are clear favorites for the Republican primary. That's how they do this. They program you. They do it. The Democrats have done it for years. They pretend like the guy you really want to vote for isn't a good choice and isn't going to win, and kind of force you into like a Joe Biden camp. He's the one that can actually beat Trump, that kind of nonsense. I think this is a very smart answer from Vivek. Let him finish.
And as somebody who's been trained in the law, I feel like a sense of obligation to do that. If somebody who understands the Constitution, it's my belief that every other Republican, myself included, needs to withdraw from any ballot that forcibly withdraws Donald Trump from the primary ballot, because that's how you actually stop the brazen election interference in our own primary. If every other Republican nullifies Maine, then it has no impact.
That is honestly absolutely brilliant too.
The length to which I've gone, and so people know this about me when I'm saying this. At this point, it is my firm conviction that this system, which has ratcheted up the threat level one by one to eliminating Donald Trump from the ballot, will stop at nothing. I'm increasingly certain will stop at nothing.
I mean, look at what they did to Bernie. They threw everything at him. And that's the thing that I think a lot of liberals or lefties missed in the general election. There were I think very few Bernie people went to the Trump camp in 2016. But in 2020, I think that a lot of the Bernie people, myself included, were so angry with the Democrats for nixing his candidacy. He was clearly the most popular guy in the race. He was filling stadiums full of people. Biden could barely get people in a high school. So there were clearly shenanigans involved there. And the Democratic caucus issue proves it. And since that happened, and since they got busted in the last election cycle, they're not even having a caucus this year. Anyway.
To keep this man away from the White House. So I think the best way to literally save Trump is to at least have arguably somebody the system might actually, even some elements of it, prefer less than Donald Trump for what I'm bringing to Washington, D.C.
That is such a good argument.
And I think that's also what this country requires. I think they duped him at many steps. They told him you can't fire those civil service bureaucrats because of so-called civil service protections. Read the law. Those civil service protections do not apply.
The conspiracy theorist in me is like, Vivek planted that guy and pre-wrote this question and answer, because Holy shit, that's a great question and a great answer. And that's the one hurdle that he has to clear in this primary are Trump voters. And that's the one question that they all have. How can I vote for you without saying I'm okay with what they're doing to Trump? You know, I think a lot of people want to vote for Trump just because they can see what the establishment media and political class are doing to him. So now this is where things get a little interesting. And, you know, we can agree or disagree on this. This is a controversial subject, but I actually kind of liked, there are elements of it I don't love, but he's very scientific about this gender thing. And even if you disagree with him, which I do to some extent, you should listen to what he has to say. Because I think that the views of right-wingers on the gender issue have been widely misconstrued. I don't think they're that radical. I really don't, and you'll hear why here. Now, you can agree or disagree with them. A lot of them are very religiously driven, which I'm not religious, so I don't have any of these predisposed ideas about gender or any of that stuff. But listen to what Vivek says here.
If you're not 18 years old, you should not be getting any chemical castration or genital mutilation, just as you can't get a tattoo, just as you can't have an addictive drink of alcohol. And so my view is we do live in a free country. If you're an adult, a fully grown adult, you're free to dress how you want. You're free how to identify how you want, as long as you're not harming anybody else. Don't expect to change the way we compete in women's sports. Don't expect to change the way we label our bathrooms, to change our language. But if you want to live your life the way you want, as long as you're not hurting somebody else with a presumptive expectation that the rest of society bends to your delusion, you're free to do so.
Now, let's just pause there for a second, because that is the radical right wing, the far right. That's what Vivek is being called, a far right. That is the far right view on this. We're fine with you being transgender, but we're not going to let kids be castrated and mutilated until they're old enough to make the decision on their own. If that's what they want to do. Because as you know, if you've been around kids, they're still growing. I mean, my son played with girl dolls when he was little, and he's the straightest kid there is now that he's, you know, going through puberty. So there is validity to this, despite people wanting to just call it bigotry or racism. These people have valid concerns. And if you listen to the way Vivek talks about this issue, he's clearly not hateful. He's clearly not like, gay people. He's not, this is not the Republican Party of, you know, even the 1990s. Because as you'll see in this later clip, I have a banger of a segment coming up of a debate between David Frum and Steve Bannon. And this is the point where you see the party switch again, because David Frum, the goddamn Bush speechwriter who came up with the axis of evil thing, is arguing the liberal side against Steve Bannon. So the populism has forced the parties to swap, because the Democrats have the power. So the donors and the state, you know, the deep state, whatever you want to call them, permanent Washington, the people that make money running campaigns and doing all this stuff, the people that work at NGOs, they do not want these insurgents in the Republican Party to prevail, because they will actually change things. They want, and anyway, I got way off the rails there, but listen, this is the point I was getting back around to is the Republican Party of today is not the party that people think it is. It's and Vivek's answer here, I think, proves that. It's a very sensible and rational answer. And listen, he goes further into genetic science here, which is something that I think he's one of the few candidates who's qualified to do it, because he was like a biotech CEO or whatever, which is also suspect. But hey, I think someone said it earlier. It's kind of like when you're in the position that we're in late stage capitalism, maybe it's going to take these billionaire types who have views outside the mainstream to come in and actually fight the power in an effective way, because they have the resources and the backing to do so. But listen to what he says on this transit. Well, I'll stop this again because Tim Pool actually says some stuff too, but listen to their diatribe here on transgender and transgenderism and that kind of thing.
But kids aren't the same as adults. And so I think protecting children is a policy position we've already well accepted in this country. And so the same logic and the same mechanism we use to prevent you from drinking by the age of 21, that we prevent you from getting a tattoo by the age of 18, you should not be undergoing genital mutilation or chemical castration as a minor in this country. And I think there's a pretty broad consensus around that.
And I want to add to this. I think it's interesting because when it comes to the issue of drinking, you can have a drink at the age of 21 and be fine. You can have a drink at the age of 31 and be fine. It's alcoholism that's bad. But if at the age of 21 you decide to undergo permanent and irreversible surgery and that was a mistake, you can't come back from that.
That's right.
So there is a serious challenge in how we deal with an issue like this, because I don't want people to take their lives. I think that's horrifying. But we did have a guest on this show who said that she thought she was a man. She believed the gender ideology she was being fed on the internet. And she talked to her brother.
See, and this is where it gets a little dicey, because some of these guys get real conspiratorial, like there's a gender ideology push, and they break it down in this, and this is what I've said as well. I think you always follow the money on this stuff. There is money in hormone therapy. There's pharmaceutical money in that industry. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that they are pushing through media and that kind of stuff this thought process for the sake of profit, not for any other reason. Some people say, oh, it's to depopulate or it's to turn us all gay or whatever. No, it's all about money. It's always about money.
And he said, get your hormones checked first. You likely have a hormone imbalance. So instead of adopting the gender ideology and taking testosterone, when she went to the doctor and got her hormones checked, it turns out that she did have a hormone imbalance. So they prescribed her female hormones. She said almost instantly gender dysphoria disappeared and she was in alignment with her own body.
Yeah.
And so my concern is if someone like that were to undergo a surgery and then regret it later, I'm not going to pretend to know what a doctor.
Can I also just say one word about this guy? I don't know this person or this individual, but there is a really small number of.
Listen to this.
So I say there are two genders, and it's a clear point. Chromosomal abnormalities. So we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. 2 of them are sex chromosomes. One is X and Y if you're a man, X and X if you're a woman. But there are some people who are born with XYY or XXY, and that's like a real thing. That's grounded in truth. It's not made up. It's in your genetics. One is called Klinefelter syndrome. One is called Jacob syndrome. These are exceedingly rare. We're talking about.
So he is laying out a scientific genetic case here for transgenderism.
About 1 in thousands at a much lower rate. So in those particular cases, yes, those are instances of what you will call intersex, which is a different phenomenon than trans. But what's happened is, let's take those rare cases to one side. And I don't know if this person you had here had such a thing or not. I would have said, not just go check your hormones, go actually get a genetic test and actually understand, are you one of the rare people with one of these chromosomal abnormalities? It's inborn. But for the purpose of this discussion in our modern politics, I don't think that this pertains to public policy.
I'll go you one further and give you my hot take on this. I think that gay people are more evolved than straight people. I think that gay and that lifestyle is another step in evolution, and evolution happens slowly. But as the world becomes more populated, and there are scientific studies that show this in like mice population, as the mice populations get larger, there are more instances of homosexuality in mice communities, and it's nature's way of controlling population growth. But I also, like I said, I think it's a genetic evolution. It really is. And there's genetic proof of gay people. You can tell there are genetic signs for it. So it's not something that people just choose to do. Although I would admit there are probably some people that do choose to do it. But overall, and he's laying it out for you right here, there are genetic mutations that cause homosexuality or transgenderism even.
Take that off the table. That exists, and we're going to acknowledge that. That's like a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the population. It's always existed. It's a chromosomal abnormality. For the rest of
chromosomal abnormality,
transgenderism, the belief that your gender does not match your biological sex, that if you're XX but you believe you're a man, it is a mental health disorder. Mm-hmm. And it needs to be treated as a mental health disorder through
Now, this is where he loses the left. But I think before you close your mind to what they're talking about here, listen to what they say about mental health. And this is one of the main reasons I pulled this clip, is he actually advocates for bringing back mental health coverage in health insurance and mental health institutions. And this is an issue, I just want to take a quick aside from this, that I'm very passionate about, because my grandmother worked in a mental health institution, and my grandmother was insanely liberal in the 80s and 90s. I grew up with her. It's probably one of the reasons I'm so political. But my grandmother hated Ronald Reagan for closing the mental institutions. First of all, because she lost her job. But second of all, because it put mentally ill people in the streets. I drive through LA all the time. I can guarantee you 90% of the homeless people in Los Angeles are mentally ill. They're yelling at parking meters. They're doing things. I saw a guy swinging a club at like nothing in downtown the other day. They're mentally ill. They need help. They're not going to get a job at McDonald's and pull themselves up by their bootstraps. So to hear again these kind of things coming from a Republican candidate is so refreshing and so evident of how the parties have completely switched sides. And we're going to go deep on that in a few minutes. My last segment, if you're watching, stick around because it's a banger, and it's some great clips. But anyway, let's keep listening to Vivek here, because I want you to hear what he has to say.
Mental health care, which often isn't covered by private health insurance. A lot
Mental
of this is
health
through
care.
pharmaceutical intervention. They prefer pill-pushing behaviors as an alternative.
There it is right there, the money thing. And that, I think, is why this is being pushed, not because, of kids that are in danger or whatever, all the flowery reasons they give you for it. It's money. It's because of money, because they can sell hormone treatment. Pharmaceutical companies can sell hormone treatments. It's a new market. It's an emerging market.
Or people who run surgery centers prefer surgery, peddling surgery as an alternative. This is a mental health condition. And once we see it that way, we realize the compassionate thing to do is from a standpoint, because I think we've gotten put into this box of being somehow antipathic because of adopting this set of views that I think seems like most of us share. I don't think the compassionate thing to do for that kid is to affirm that kid's confusion. That's not compassion. That is cruelty. And I think we should actually feel that. It shouldn't be just a thing we say. We should acknowledge that and act with the compassion and say that kid's going through a struggle. Help the kid get through the struggle. That's what we should be doing, not surgically operating on them and chemically castrating.
So liberals, how can you argue with that? He's saying if a kid is going through a struggle, we want to help them through the struggle, not tell them they're bad people or that they're wrong even. Just help them through the struggle. Maybe they discover that they are gender fluid or transgender. Then once they're an adult, they can get that surgery. But I don't think that their position on this issue is by any means irrational or bigoted. I think it's very sensible.
Them.
You pointed out that it is a mental health disorder. It is listed in the DSM-5 as a mental health disorder. This is an academic statement. This is not meant to be invective.
Yeah.
But there.
And Tim is very hateful of anything the left is good with. So, I'm going to give him a pass on that. But I don't think he says anything too out of line.
There are many people that I speak with who are liberal or Democrat that get offended when I point out the fact that it is listed in the DSM-5 as a mental health disorder. And my argument is, there's another mental health disorder called pica. Are you familiar with this?
No.
It's where people eat things that aren't food. We don't affirm these things. We try to help these people, because I agree with you, as you said, to tell someone eating pennies is something they should do is cruelty to them.
See, I think that one of the things I would say if I was talking to someone on the left
but that's
on this
different,
Tim.
I mean, someone who's gay, openly gay, like it's there's so much more nuance than that.
Offensive isn't that really stigmatizing mental health disorder? To say that you consider it so offensive to have a mental health disorder that should trigger the fact that you have a mental health condition. To say that that's in such a category that it is so offensive that you said such a thing about me. I think the compassionate thing to do is actually recognize that there are many Americans who go through a lot, especially now more than even 30.
So he's trying to make it out that like people who are offended by calling, people who think they're transgender or gay, or people who are transgender or gay, a mental health disorder is derogatory towards people with mental health disorders. No, Vivek, you're a little misguided on that one. I think people are offended that you're calling their lifestyle a mental health disorder. It's not a mental health disorder. People are born gay. You just said it yourself. You just laid out the scientific case for it. So this is where these guys lose me just a little bit. But I think overall their position, like I said, for the Republican Party, the conservatives, the party that has the religious right, is a lot less bigoted and crazy than people make it out to be.
40 years
I'll
ago,
leave it at
social
that.
media and otherwise, playing the loss of purpose, the loss of faith. We can go deeper on that. Yes, there are all kinds of mental health conditions that are rampant in the United States of America today. We should have.
And I'm going to stop there with that. So anyway, the whole point of that was just to show you that, first of all, the idea that democracy is on the ballot is a joke. And second of all, Vivek makes some good points. And I think that he's being largely overlooked, especially by the mainstream media in the Iowa caucus. I think he's going to do well. Based on what I've seen, he's been on the ground in Iowa, shaking hands and talking to people. And people, that is a whole room full of a lot of white guys. And I'm sure that's what they were aiming for. But they're all there for Vivek. So, I mean, call them racists, call them MAGA racists, whatever you want. I mean, it's looking like the Republican Party this cycle has some pretty diverse candidates. You know, despite what you think about Nikki Haley, I don't think highly of her, but she's a woman of color,